The night sky above our heads is filled with amazing sights, and they're quite large. Many of them are many times the size of the full moon. The only problem is our human eyes cannot see them. They are just too dim. We are diurnal creatures, organisms of the day, and our eyes have evolved for daylight. But you can be sure that an owl with eyes 35 to 100 times more sensitive to light than ours, when it looks into the night sky, it sees a very different view than what we do. A sky full of interstellar clouds of stunning color and brilliance, and many of them far, far bigger than the full moon. In this episode of Sky Story, I thought we'd have a little fun. A couple weeks ago, I imaged a nearly full moon with an 80mm telescope, and we're going to use that to make a direct comparison between the moon and the sizes of the objects in the sky. So hang on to your hats, this should be fun. This is LBN 667, the Sol Nebula located in the constellation Cassiopeia. It is like a great bubble in space, appearing red naturally, though if the middle range of red is pulled away, it reveals the beautiful blue colors hidden within. This is only a piece of the Sol Nebula, and it is part of a much larger structure called the Heart and Soul. At 7,500 light-years away, it is about 5 times the size of the full moon in the night sky. This is the famous open star cluster, the Pleiades. It is between 1 and 200 million years old. That's young for stars. And its beautiful blue hue happens because its large blue stars are currently passing through a cloud of interstellar dust, which diffuses their light the same way clouds on Earth diffuse the light of the sun. The Pleiades is visible to the naked eye, but not nearly with the same blue brilliance as is revealed through a telescope, especially with a camera attached. This portion of the Pleiades is about twice the diameter of the full moon, but if we include the many dimmer, almost invisible stars, it is much larger. This fascinatingly colorful nebula is known as the Witch's Broom, and it is the remnant of an ancient supernova that happened perhaps 10,000 years ago. And what you're seeing is a hot, ionized piece of its shell blasted away into space. Like the Elephant's Trunk Nebula, it is narrow compared to the diameter of the full moon, but about twice as wide. However, this is only one part of the supernova's remnant. This is another part of the Veil Nebula complex, known as the Eastern Veil. As you can see, portions of the Eastern Veil are almost the same diameter as the full moon. Much of it is 1/4 to 1/3 the diameter of the full moon, and it is fully 3 times the width. The entire Veil Nebula complex is estimated to be some 2,400 light-years away, and the star that created it was roughly 20 times the mass of our Sun when it exploded. In reality, the Veil Nebula complex is a sphere, or more like a bubble, of gases racing away roughly equally in every direction. It appears to us as thin filaments, roughly in a circle, because the gases that created the nebula are highly dispersed equally in every direction like an expanding bubble. And it is only along the outer edges where we can see enough of the gases that they have an appearance of density. Here, we have 2 nebulae side by side, if you can truly call structures light-years broad side by side. Upper right, we have the famous Horsehead Nebula, which is actually more like a dark cloud of stardust, silhouetted by ionized gases behind it. And to the lower left, we have the beautiful Flame Nebula. The Flame Nebula is 1,354 light-years away, and the Horsehead Nebula is nearby to it at 1,375 light-years away. What you can see of the Flame Nebula here is about 3/4 the diameter of the full moon. Let's look to the upper right at the Horsehead. Now the Horsehead itself is relatively small. However, the ionized cloud behind the Horsehead Nebula is much larger and extends far out of the frame. All in all, well over 12 times the size of the full moon. Imagine being able to look up into the sky and see that. It's right there. It's just too dim for our eyes to perceive it. This is LDN 1076, sometimes known as Barnard 150, or more colorfully, the Seahorse Nebula. And unlike the previous nebulae we have already looked at, this one is dark. It is a cloud of congealing stardust against a field of stars. Overall, in comparison to the moon, it is quite narrow, though it's about 3 times as long as the full moon is wide. It is seen in front of a vast thicket of stars, which is useful because dark nebula are very hard to image at all, and the stars provide sufficient ambient and background light to tease it out. This is a not very good image of the galaxy Andromeda. This is the equivalent of only about an hour of dual band imaging while I was waiting for another target to rise. Andromeda is the closest galaxy to our galaxy, the Milky Way, and it is on a collision course with the Milky Way. And our two galaxies are destined to meet up in about 5 billion years. However, don't fret, this won't mean the destruction of either galaxy. Galaxies are mostly immense clouds of gases, and there are vast light years of space between the stars and planets within a galaxy. Our galaxies will meet up and intertwine through complex tides of gravity, ultimately merging into a single new supergalaxy. At this point in time, the Andromeda Galaxy is over 2.5 million light-years away. But even then, it is vast in the night sky. I cannot squeeze all of it into a single frame here, and what I can squeeze in is 3 times the size of the full moon. If we show a 2-panel mosaic of the Andromeda Galaxy so that we can see it all in one shot, and shrink the moon to scale, we can see that top to bottom the Andromeda Galaxy is almost the same diameter as the full moon, and going left to right, it is 4 times the diameter. And yet this magnificent and huge structure, right there in the nighttime sky, is hidden only by the capacities of our eyes, which have been designed by evolution to perform best during the day. This nebula, M78, bears the quirky name the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula. Don't ask me why. It is about 1600 light-years away, and like the Pleiades that we looked at earlier, it is a reflection nebula, meaning the majority of its illumination comes from light reflected by nearby stars, as opposed to emission nebulae, where the light is emitted by gases themselves, which are ionized by the radiation coming off stars. The Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula has a variety of substances within it, visible as bright translucent hazes in the regions on the left that I think of as the eyes, and there are stars hidden within the dark stardust to the right, appearing like flame within smoke. It is a very beautiful nebula, the color of which is added to by red ionized gases off to the left. The primary body of the nebula is about 2/3 the diameter of the moon top to bottom and twice the diameter of the moon left to right. However, if we include the entire haze of gas around the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula, it is considerably more than 6 times the size of the full moon. At about 1/4 the size of the full moon in the nighttime sky, the Whirlpool Galaxy and the companion galaxy that is in the process of merging with it might not seem that impressively large, but when you consider that it is over 23 million light-years away from our own galaxy, then the fact that it occupies so much of the nighttime sky at all becomes something of a wonder. This is the Rosette Nebula, over 5,200 light-years from Earth, and it is so vast in the nighttime sky that the only way I could film it was to take a mosaic combining 2 images. And the only way to relate the full moon's size in comparison to the rosette is to reduce the moon relative to the image, to compensate for the fact that I have to show 2 images merged together of the nebula to fit them onto the frame at all. All in all, the Rosette Nebula occupies as much space as 5 to 6 full moons within the nighttime sky. And among the stars, it is perhaps the most beautiful wonder we cannot see. But we're not done yet. While there are many objects in the sky that we could consider, there is one more particularly magnificent one for us to take a look at. This is the famous Great Orion Nebula, the nearby Running Man Nebula on the upper left, and between the Moon and the Orion Nebula, Demeran's Nebula, a mini nebula very similar to the Orion, just on a much smaller scale. It is the result of a super high dynamic range composites of several images that I put together to capture all the detail hidden within this nebula, concealed by its very bright areas which contrast sharply with its darkest regions. At 1,500 light-years distance, you could say this nebula is relatively close to Earth, and it is one of the brightest structures apart from the Moon and the planet Jupiter in the nighttime sky, one of the very few nebulae that are actually visible to the naked eye and easily resolved through even a pair of binoculars. If you know where the constellation Orion is and you can identify Orion's sword, it appears as a fuzzy star halfway down the sword. And the Great Orion Complex is a bit bigger than what I can fit into the frame here. There are darker gases that have not yet been fully resolved, and the Running Man Nebula on the upper left is not fully caught within the frame. The structure is just too big overall. The volume of the entire complex is some 6 times the size of the full moon. We could go on and on and on like that. The sky is a place overhead, right above us at any moment, filled with wonders. So much light that we just cannot see. I've often wondered what it would be like to have the eyes of an owl and live beneath a nighttime sky filled with the luminous structures of nebulae the spiraling hazes of galaxies, the mysterious twisting, trailing wisps of stardust known as dark nebulae, there is a world of wonder right overhead. And it may be the Sky Story, but it is also Earth's story, for we are part of that amazing universe. I hope this video leads you to go outside, and the next time you look up into the sky, especially if there is a full moon or a dark black night, to see it with new eyes and new wonder.